Nope. The path for most people to excellence is actually through fulfillment.
But what you're saying is actually something that I struggle with.
What is the squiggle you need to make today or this month or this year to get to the hill that's going to give you the information you need to keep going?
Macro patience, micro speed.
Where the mind goes.
Okay, let's say you've been blindfolded and dropped in the middle of nowhere, okay? You take off your blindfold and you're in an unfamiliar place. It's a mountain forest. You look through the trees and you see a tall mountain rising in the distance with many smaller mountains in between. You decide you want to go to that mountaintop so you can look around and get your bearings. Without a map, what path would you take to get to the top of the mountain?
The path that I would take would probably be the path of least resistance. My first thought is I'd want to go around the mountains, to not have to climb over the mountains. But realistically, I think the most simple way is to draw a straight path from A to B and follow that as tightly as I can.
Nice. And I feel like when I first was asked this question, and I was asked it in more of a format of reading it, same thing, right? It was kind of like, okay, I want to get to the mountaintop, point A to point B, and of course we'll like move around some obstacles along the way, right? That's like I think what most people would probably say.
Mm-hmm.
And in mathematics, there is this concept called gradient ascent, and it's a way to find the least amount of effort to get down a mathematical or figurative mountain. It's a way for them to find through mathematics what's the kind of path of least resistance down a mountain. It's not a point A to point B path. The goal is not to see the mountain in the distance and then just start walking directly there. Gradient ascent says, okay, you see the mountain in the distance, you know you want to go there, but actually what we're going to do is ignore the destination most of the time. We're actually going to completely put that mountaintop in the distance out of our minds, and we're going to look around us in that present moment, and we're going to see, oh, okay, here's a ravine that I see in front of me that gets to this little hilltop. If I can get up there, I'm going to have a better vantage point of the valley around me, because right now I'm in the trees. I can't really see where I am. I don't have my bearings. Okay. So, okay, I'm going to follow this little ravine. I get to the top of this hill. Oh, now that I'm top of this hill, I see that there's actually a shorter mountain that's up here to the north, that if I can just dip down around this lake, hike up to the top of this mountain, I'm going to have a way better vantage point. And then I'll probably be able to map my way to that larger mountain without, accidentally going into this deep canyon that I can't get out of, or right. So I'm getting a little too far down into the metaphor. But what I'm trying to say is when we follow this idea of gradient ascent in our actual lives, and particularly in our careers, it's not about point A to point B, right? For example, I want to be a successful business owner. Mm-hmm. It's not about, okay, I'm just going to, send 1 million emails to 1 million potential clients, and that's how my business is born, right? It's much more of like, okay, where am I at my present moment? What's the next little hill I can climb to get me new information I didn't have before, right? And with that new information, I can now make a better, more informed decision about the path I need to go. And really what gradient ascent is saying is that often the path of least resistance to where you're trying to go requires a squiggle, because we don't know the obstacles in our way. We don't know the lay of the topography or the valleys or the lakes or the rivers around us that we're trying to navigate through. And if we just kind of take this like hustle grind mentality and go straight through, maybe we'll get there, but we might also drown in a river or, break our leg trying to go down this too steep hill instead of just going around it. Right. And so I really wanted to bring that to you today, because I think in the world of like goals and strategic planning, whether you're in business or you already work for an organization, but you're trying to do something big, right? We get so caught up in saying, okay, I'm going to make my 5-year or my 10-year plan, right? And you just set this point A to point B type of goal instead of saying, actually, I'm not going to make a 5 to 10-year plan. I'm going to make a 6-month or a 12-month plan, and maybe I have that North Star way off in, the 10-year horizon, but I'm not going to hyper focus on that. I'm actually going to ignore that most of the time and check in with it on a very periodic basis. And so I'm curious with this, just thinking about you in your business now, where do you think you lie on this spectrum? Like, do you tend to be a person who sets those 5 to 10 year goals and then, only focuses on that and kind of grinds your way there? Or, are you more on the gradient ascent kind of side of the spectrum?
I'm definitely on the former, and it's starting to resonate with me as you keep explaining this a little bit more. But what you're saying is actually something that I struggle with, and I've struggled with this in not just my entrepreneurship, but back when I was working a corporate job as well. I always have this tendency of being very clear about where I want to go, but unclear about how I want to get there. And sometimes I'll get caught up in what it would feel like to be at this endpoint and who I would be if I was at this endpoint, and then get frustrated at the fact that I am not there yet. Right. And I like to fantasize sometimes about, where I can take my business. Right. And back when I was in corporate, I'd like to fantasize about, you know, being an executive or a CEO of some big corporate business, but I'd get frustrated on the minutia of how to get there. And I've been coached on this before, but the term gradient ascent resonates with me specifically because uh, I'm aware that this is not a linear path, but at the same time, I can take a look at someone else's path and journey to where I want to go, and it does look linear. Right. I think if you were to look back at someone else's path or even at your own path, you can't help but linearize it in a chronological timeline and say, oh, okay, point A got you to point B, which got you to point C. And yeah, there's a little hiccup here, but you got to point D and now you're at point Z. I struggle with that personally. And I'd love to hear any tactics that you've come up with to help refocus and create smaller, what I'd call, micro goals to kind of attack this. And I'd love to learn from that.
Yeah, totally. Before I dive into that, you kind of sparked something for me around that it's the linearity of it all, because I think we really do tell our own stories sometimes in this very linear way once we've achieved success, right? And I think it's just natural. Like, I think the human brain is designed to want to tell stories in a linear way because it's easy for us to remember, right? Like, when you think back on your own life, it can sometimes feel linear, right? We like build this linear path of like how we came to be, because that's how stories can be told, and more importantly, how they can be easily digested. But I think real life isn't that way. And I didn't come up with this. Somebody else said it, but somebody wise once said to be like, embrace the squiggle, which I think is what gradient ascent is trying to say is what is the squiggle you need to make today or this month or this year to get to the hill that's going to give you the information you need to keep going, to level up, right? Leveling up is not like a video game. It's not this linear path from level 1 to level 2 to level 3. Sometimes you go to level 3 and then you realize you got to go to level 2 again to learn something you missed, to then jump to level 7, right? That's more how real life works and feels. And I've definitely experienced that in my business. And I think I'm wrestling with that right now. It's like I want more linear growth. But that's not how true, I think, growth and entrepreneurship or intrapreneurship, if you're working for an organization, even works. And something that helps me stay true to this idea of gradient ascent is I used to be, I love strategic planning. And I used to be somebody who thought in like 5 to 7 year time horizons. And I would make these 5 to 7 year goals. And again, I don't think it's bad to kind of know what that mountain in the distance is. But the key is you've got to know what it is. And then you've got to, spend most of your time actually forgetting about it. You've got to completely let go of the destination, ignore it. And instead, I now set just 1 year goals for myself. And so in a January of each year, I'll come and say, okay, what are my North Stars for the year? What are those hills I'm trying to climb? And then I break those hills down into smaller chunks. And I say, okay, now what's the hill for this month? Okay, now each week on Monday, what are the hills I'm going to try to climb this week to get to those things, right? And so it's chunking down, and it's easy. It's so easy to beat ourselves up and get so stuck on even that 1 year goal, right? I do that sometimes. And so I force myself in my like work planning process to actually not think about those things except on a very specific cadence, because then it allows me to say, okay, my locus of control today is not, bringing in X revenue. My locus of control today is make this many cold emails, make this many cold calls, or, work on editing this project, or work with this coaching client, right? That's the locus of control I have in a single day. And I think Gradient Ascent is really just trying to help us reconnect with what is your present day locus of control and focus on that and use that to propel you forward rather than getting stuck in the mud that we get ourselves stuck in sometimes.
No, I very much resonate with that. What comes to mind is a quote by one of the more prominent entrepreneurs in the business zeitgeist, definitely on social media. He's got one of the largest presence. His name is Gary Vaynerchuk.
Oh, I have heard of Gary V. Okay.
Okay, yeah, he's a media mogul. He runs a media business that does everything from advertising to sports marketing management. But he's also very prominent on coaching other entrepreneurs. Right, he wrote a very famous book called Jab, 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 Right Hook, which is all about giving, giving, giving,
Oh,
and then
that's cool.
asking, right after you've given so much. But he has a really great quote on how to frame your goals and getting to the pinnacle, that top of the mountain, right? And the quote is very simple. It's 4 words. It's macro patience, micro speed. For me, that it hits really close to home because, yeah, I do have lofty goals, right? And I want to get there as fast as possible, but I'm going to need to employ quite a bit of patience if I want to get there. At the same time, at the macro level, while I'm giving myself the patience that I need, I want to be maniacal in the speed of the micro, meaning I want to be every day doing hitting things that achieve those goals, right? That allow me to get closer to that big pinnacle. But I know that all I need to focus on is today, right? All I need to focus on are the actions that I can control today to get me to where I want to go. And like you said, right, maybe that's just sending out 5, 10, 15 cold emails. Maybe that's just putting the work in on my website that I need to. Maybe that's studying how to build a better social media presence, right? I want to have the speed in the micro, but in order for me to get where I want to and be able to do this over a long enough timeline, I need to give myself that macro patience. So this gradient ascent concept sounds very familiar to what Gary has preached, which is move as quickly as you can on a day-to-day basis, but give yourself that patience over a long timeline to know that, hey, it's going to take time to hit these goals. Does that make sense? That kind of, am I on the same page there?
Yeah. Oh, 100%. And I think there's another concept I kind of wanted to throw your way that I think when combined with gradient ascent starts to create this really cool synergy effect when you, especially now that you're talking about this idea of micro speed, like how do you achieve like consistent motivation and drive around micro speed? I think this other concept that I'm going to share with you called micromotives might do that, but I'm curious. Push back on me if you think it's different. So this concept of gradient ascent, I learned it from a book called The Dark Horse. It's written by Todd Rose and Ogie Ogas. Have you ever read that book?
Never heard of it.
Oh, cool. Highly recommend it. It's an amazing book. I think amazing for literally anyone who wants to do work on any level, whether it's as an entrepreneur or in an organization. I think it's invaluable knowledge. It's all based in research. They did a ton of studies with many different people, but they took all of that research and they then used it to write this book called The Dark Horse. And in it, they talk about the dark horse mindset. And there are 4 elements to that. And I'm only going to talk about 2 today. One is gradient ascent, right? And the other is called micromotives. And micromotives really say, okay, in their research, Todd Rose and Ogie Ogas were really asking this question: how is it that there are these highly, highly successful, effective people who have totally changed careers like way late in the game, maybe in their 30s, maybe in their 50s, maybe they've changed their careers multiple times and they've been wildly successful in their like second career to the point where they leapfrogged people who'd been doing it 20, 30, 40 years longer than them, but they somehow just again got to the top of the mountain. What was that process? And they kept looking and they were like, what are these common factors, right? They thought, does it have something to do with income? Does it have something to do with the way they were nurtured? Does it have something to do with like race or ethnicity? Does it have something to do with gender? And they were finding that all of these controls, there were no commonalities between all of these things, except for one thing. And the one thing they found that was the same between all of these people that were highly successful after totally changing careers was that they had pursued and prioritized fulfillment in what they were doing above all other things. They had totally thrown the idea of success as the goal out. All they prioritized was fulfillment. And so, what this whole dark horse book and mindset is about is saying that the path for most people to excellence is actually through fulfillment. Because when you prioritize fulfillment, you naturally are going to work harder. You're naturally going to find shortcuts. You're naturally going to be much more creative because you're loving it. Because it's not about putting in a certain amount of hours. It's not about earning X amount of dollars. It's about the absolute joy. And when we're joyful, we're just more creative. We work harder. We are playing. We're not working, right? And so they, again, boil this like approach down to these four things. And Micromotives really says, when we can really get honest with ourselves about the things that drive us and get us excited, then we are much better at picking the thing that brings us fulfillment. I think as human beings and in our culture, we do not do a good job of teaching ourselves and each other what actually gets us excited to do work. And so I wanted to pose a question to you about what are your actual micromotives? Micromotives isn't like, I like personal fitness, right? I know that's like the business that you're currently building. That's still too big. I would say micromotives are much more granular than that. It would be something like, I love, working with a person and watching them feel empowered, right? It would be, I love the act of working out because it makes me feel really good in my body and have good mental health. There are micromotives that can get as specific as, I love to move really tiny things with incredible precision, right? So micromotives can get really specific. An example for me would be, I absolutely love the process of splicing audio and pulling different pieces apart to tell a story, right? That's part of why I like doing this podcast. Podcasting is very big, but there's something about the act of like listening to a piece of audio and then resplicing it together to tell a different story that's much more engaging that, like, I don't know, it just gets me stoked. Turning it back to you, what are those things for you? And they don't need to be related. And in fact, they recommend broadening it. Like, don't just think about personal fitness. Like, give me 5 things that are micromotives for you, regardless of the topic.
The first one that came to mind, I'll tell a little story about what happened to me today with a client. So I met a new client for the first time. Her name is Sasha. Sasha definitely has a background in some sort of athletic perspective, but she's clearly spent years, if not decades, regressing from that. She's not where she wants to be physically, and she's very clear that she doesn't feel strong. She doesn't feel healthy anymore. And I only spent an hour with her today, but at the end of that session, she actually started crying, tears of joy, because she's forgot what it felt like to to be healthy, to exercise, to to put effort into something and feel that strength that she has deep down and that she used to have all the time. Um, and when I tell you, you could pay me in those tears, I could be paid $0. But if that was the outcome every time, I would do that for the rest of my life. That feeling of, I'm helping someone get out of their own way. I'm helping someone improve physically, which is helping them mentally. That's definitely a micro motive for me. I love the art of programming workouts. So I love sitting down behind the computer and thinking, okay, what is these person's goals? Where do they want to get in 3 months? And how do I help construct a program around their workouts that allow them to go from not knowing how to do an exercise to practicing that exercise to getting stronger in that exercise to eventually moving into a more complex exercise. But the programming aspect of that is where I come into play, and where I help guide them over the course of a day, a week, a month, a year, right? I love that aspect. I like getting into the gym early. I love that feeling of the sun just coming up and I'm walking into work and I feel like I'm already got ahead of the day, and I meet someone who's my client at 6 a.m. and they're tired. They let me know they're tired, but my energy is what carries them through the workout. And then they leave and they're feeling much better when then they walked into the gym. Um, and at the end of the day, I like picking up weights and putting them down, right? It's a fun feeling to say, oh, I've never lifted that specific amount of weight before, and I just got that accomplished today. I think that's only four, but those are what comes to mind when I think of my micro motives.
I want to see that was great, by the way. I feel like you really did start to break down like all these little pieces that you love and enjoy and how those add up to going, ooh, I want to go do personal training, right? And I think you're a little bit farther along than maybe the average person, right? But let's think of something just for fun. Like, what's a micromotive that has nothing to do with personal training? What's something you just love to do that just you could do all day, or you find yourself getting lost in the task?
I really love listening to podcasts. I know we're on a podcast right now, but one of my favorite things to do is to explore new podcasts, to try new ones out. I'm blown away at how many quality pieces of information are out there that no one's ever told me about. And being able to find those and share those with other people brings me a lot of joy. And same with books. I like being able to feel, not only selfishly feel like I'm well read, but the other day I was in a bookstore with a friend of mine and I was just pointing out a few books that I like. Oh, I love that author there. Oh, this book is really good. You should try it. And he just the way that he responded was like, I had no clue you were this well read. And I don't consider myself that well read until he said that. But it felt good to not only be able to say I've read these books, but here's why I think you should read these books as well.
That's awesome. And I would almost like boil that down even further to you love to learn new information and to always be absorbing new. It's not just about like being well read is the goal at all. I feel like to your point, you didn't even consider yourself that, but it's like the act of learning and absorbing and finding new information. You love to go like research and find things. Is that true? Am I tracking right?
Yeah, very true. But I love, and this goes back to personal training. This goes into other aspects. I like when I can share something with someone, and I see their eyes light up, and they start to think about something in a different perspective, and they're like, "Oh, I've never thought about it that way," or "Ooh, I like the way that sounds,"
Yeah.
and I get a selfish amount of joy when I can share that with someone. So it does motivate me more to learn more,
Yeah.
right? To read more, to listen more, because at the end of the day, it's not so I can absorb all this information; it's so that I can share this with people who need that information.
The reason I'm bringing this up
Mm-hmm.
is what the Dark Horse book is saying is we will find the most fulfillment and therefore the most excellence and performance in our careers when we stack our micromotives, right? So if we can do an audit of ourselves and understand what are all the little micromotives that I have, how do I then do work that stacks them? Or how can I pull this micromotive that might seem off kind of separate, like the love of like learning and reading and absorbing new information? How do I then integrate that into what I'm doing to then fuel me even further, to help me go even farther? And the reason I wanted to bring up micromotives in tandem with the idea of gradient ascent is when you have this distant mountain, it's easy to get tired, right? If you're trying to do something that probably takes you a decade to achieve it, if you're going to go that distance, you've got to be stoked. Like you've got to find ways to rejuvenate your joy and your passion and your drive. And that linear path, I just don't think it works except for a very small percentage of the population.
I'd argue I don't think it even exists, right? I mean, the linear path is uh, it's an idea, right? It's a theory, but in practice, I mean, I'd argue that almost anyone's path to success, if you were looking and you were to really break it down and ask them the hard questions, I would say I don't think you could find a single linear path. But I very much resonates with me how you're saying this, and it helps me realize that I am in the right direction, right? Because what I'm doing now and where I want to go, uh, I'm going to be filled with opportunity to share information with people. I'm going to be filled with those opportunities to to make someone cry tears of joy because they didn't realize they had the ability to gain this strength or the ability to move like this. And this is helping me kind of realize, I don't know what the path is to get to that pinnacle, but I can definitely tell I'm on that journey, and I don't know what obstacles lie ahead of me, and I don't know how I'm going to get there, but knowing that I can get there and having the patience to do so with the same intensity day to day to help me get there is very motivating.
Where the mind goes.